Ever since she was a child, Eleanor had a peculiar fear of mirrors. She could never quite explain why, but every time she caught her reflection, a deep unease slithered through her spine. It wasn't just the usual discomfort of self-perception. It was something deeper, something instinctual. As she grew older, she learned to suppress the irrational fear. Mirrors were just glass, after all. That was, until she moved into her new apartment, a small, dimly lit unit in an old Victorian building. It was charming in its own way, filled with antique fixtures and a lingering scent of lavender and dust. But the mirrors, there were too many of them. Large, ornate mirrors hung in almost every room, their silvered surfaces dulled with age. Some were cracked, others spotted with time. The landlord, an old woman with cloudy eyes and a hushed voice, insisted that they were original to the building and could not be removed. Eleanor didn't argue. She told herself it was just an aesthetic choice, though deep down, unease coiled in her stomach. The first few nights passed without incident, but on the fourth night, something changed. She woke in the middle of the night, a cold sweat clinging to her skin. The room was still, save for the occasional creak of the old pipes. She turned over, and that's when she saw it. Her mirror, a tall, narrow thing framed in dark mahogany, stood across from her bed. In the dim light, her reflection should have been barely visible, but it was there, standing unnaturally clear, and it was watching her. Her breath hitched as she stared at her own face. Her reflection didn't mirror her movements. She blinked. It didn't. A chill wrapped around her bones like icy fingers. Then, slowly, so slowly that it sent a scream crawling up her throat, her reflection smiled. Not a natural smile, not one that she would ever make. It was wide, unnatural, stretching too far across her face, exposing teeth that were just a little too sharp, a little too white. Eleanor scrambled out of bed, her breath coming in short gasps. She turned on every light in the room, but the moment the bulbs flickered to life, the reflection snapped back into place, normal, mirroring her own frantic breathing. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Over the next few days, things worsened. The mirror's reflection began lagging behind her movements, fractions of a second at first, then longer. One morning, as she brushed her hair, she dropped the brush. Her reflection didn't react. It simply stared at her, unmoving, eyes locked onto hers. It didn't even blink. Terrified, she covered the mirror with an old bedsheet. But even then, she felt its presence behind the fabric, as though something on the other side was watching, waiting. Then the whispers started. Late at night, as she lay in bed, she would hear them. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, but growing clearer each time. "Let me out!" Her heart pounded. The voice was her own. She refused to look at the mirror, but she could feel it pulling at her, an invisible force gnawing at the edges of her sanity. She knew she had to leave, to get rid of the mirror, to destroy it if she had to. But something held her back. Some unseen force kept her rooted in place. And then, one night, she woke to find the bedsheet had been removed. The mirror was uncovered, standing tall and gleaming in the dim light. And her reflection was gone. A hollow, empty abyss stared back at her. She reached out, trembling, and the surface rippled like water. A shadowed figure stepped forward from the darkness within the glass. It was her, but it wasn't. The other Eleanor grinned, eyes black as voids, teeth stretching into something inhuman. "Your turn," it whispered. Before she could scream, cold hands burst through the glass, yanking her inside. The world flipped, her body contorted, and suddenly she was no longer standing in her bedroom. She was inside the mirror. She pounded on the glass, but her reflection only smirked, running a hand through its hair before turning away, stepping into the real world. Eleanor screamed, but no sound escaped. She clawed at the surface, desperate to get out, but all she could do was watch as her reflection, the thing that had stolen her face, walked out of the room and turned off the lights. Then silence. Days, weeks, months passed. She didn't know anymore. Time was a cruel joke in this glass prison. All she could do was watch. And wait. Wait for someone new to move in. Wait for her chance. Because one day, someone would stand before this mirror again, and when they did, when they hesitated, when they felt the pull, she would smile. And she would finally be free. But the mirror's hunger was insatiable. Eleanor soon discovered she wasn't alone in the darkness. Shadows lurked behind her, whispering in voices that weren't human. Some pleaded for release, their voices twisted in agony. Others laughed, a hollow, grating sound that made her insides twist. Each reflection trapped before her had become a part of this world, absorbed into the abyss. They had all smiled once, all reached out in desperation. Now, they were nothing but lost souls, echoes of those who had once lived. Would she become one of them? Or would she finally escape? Then one day the door to the apartment creaked open. A new tenant had arrived. A young man named Daniel entered, dragging his suitcase behind him. He barely noticed the mirror at first, tossing his keys onto the counter and collapsing onto the couch, exhausted from the move. But the moment he passed by the mirror, something made him pause. He turned, staring into its depths. Eleanor's heart pounded. This was it, her chance. Daniel's brow furrowed as he examined his reflection. Something about it seemed off. He leaned in closer, his breath fogging the glass. Eleanor mirrored his movements, pressing her hands against the cold surface. She had to make him look, had to make him see. The reflection flickered. Daniel gasped. His mirrored self was grinning at him, lips curling too wide, teeth just a bit too sharp. He stumbled back, shaking his head. "No way," he whispered. "Just tired, just seeing things." But Eleanor reached out, her fingers stretching towards him, her lips forming silent pleas. "Help me." Daniel's heartbeat thundered in his ears. His hands trembled as he reached forward, fingertips grazing the glass. A whisper coiled through his mind, soft, seductive. "Let me out." His pupils dilated, and then he smiled,